Hello and welcome to special Liberty Nation Point Counterpoint. With the latest news that Derek Chauvin's lawyer, Eric Nelson, has filed a petition for a new trial, we're joined by Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza Esquire, who's also the host of the Uprising podcast, and Liberty Nation's socio-political correspondent, Mr. Jeff Charles, to expand on the debate that's gripped the country. Welcome, gentlemen.
Yeah,
hello.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so Jeff, let's kick off with you. What's your position on this? And more specifically, what are your thoughts on the actions of Juror 52, Brendan Mitchell?
Yeah, so Brandon Mitchell, he's making the rounds in the media. I'm not a big fan of that kind of thing, but I mean, people do it, so that's how it rolls out. But I think that as far as the defense is concerned, I mean, he caused some problems for them, and he also may have given them something to use on appeal. He did poke a big hole in the notion that the jury came to the verdict because they were afraid of the threat of riots or of unrest, or they were influenced by outside forces. Now, he's not the only juror to say that wasn't the case. I mean, Lisa Christensen came out last week and she was an alternate juror. And while she indicated that she was concerned about that kind of thing, as far as her becoming a juror in the first place, she did say that it did not influence her decision. Brandon Mitchell said the same thing. So if they're going to win on appeal, if they're going to go that route, saying that there were outside influences, they're going to have to show that at least one juror was influenced by the threat of violence. However, on the other hand, wearing that shirt with George Floyd on it, that could be used in an appeal to show a certain level of bias. So I do think that there's a little bit of both that the defense can take from this. But I think their best bet would have been to show that the jury was unduly influenced by outside factors. And I don't think that that's going to be shown here.
Okay, Scott, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't agree that you have to have a juror state they were unduly influenced by threats or publicity to get a new trial or a reversal based on that fact. So Mr. Mitchell's announcement that he wasn't so biased would bear, I think, little weight in court. It would be an examination of whether the facts around sort of his deliberations revealed that bias. And that's, the courts are loath to get into these sorts of things because of all that's involved. And that's why Minnesota has this hearing that I think they're probably going to have to undertake to determine, where this bias was. But I wouldn't, Jeff, give, credit or take comfort in like, oh, well, we don't have to worry about that because he said it wasn't a big deal. He can only speak for himself in any case, not the other jurors. And that other person was an alternate who didn't weigh in on the guilt. So her statements, I think, are of little value to determine where things are going forward, I would say this, that one of the kind of popular misperceptions I see out there is that Mr. Mitchell lied on his juror form. I have read the questionnaire. I haven't read the questionnaire that he submitted with his responses because that's kept confidential, but I've read the blank questionnaire that was sent to all the jurors, and it just says, have you been to a rally in Minneapolis or a protest in Minneapolis? It does not say, have you been to a protest about these matters, which you could call that poor questioning, from the court. I don't know how that question came to be, but it doesn't leave it open-ended. So I don't think if I were his attorney, I wouldn't say, you're likely to see a perjury rap. So, but that's a separate question from, of course, Mr. Chauvin's interests. And I think that the wearing of the shirt that says, get your knee off our neck, the attendance at the rally, which was also misreported as an anniversary of the March on Washington. It occurred during that time, and they tried to sell it like that, but it was Al Sharpton's National Action Network, which put on that march, which is, for people who don't know, is about as politically inflammatory as it gets. So I think that
Al Sharpton involved in politics? Surely not.
So I think that these stories and what we've learned from Mr. Mitchell may well be very good for Mr. Chauvin. It's far from a slam dunk, I think, but it's way better than a nothing burger.
All right, Scott, let me just cut to the chase on this. Was this a fair trial?
Oh, certainly not. The moment that Mr. Chauvin was sort of given the dream team of prosecutors, that they went out and recruited like this special squad of prosecutors to make sure that he was put behind bars. That's where fairness ended, I think. There are many other instances throughout the trial where his, fairness was impinged on. Now, whether or not that means he's legally entitled to a reversal or a new trial, that's a much trickier question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I tend to think that that the answer is yes, but I would be interested in examining that juror under oath, hearing some more about it before I went ahead. But there is a difference there.
Okay, Jeff, what are your thoughts on this? Was this a fair trial?
Yeah, I do think it was a fair trial. And I do agree that I would love to hear this juror under oath as well. I mean, I would want to hear what he has to say. But I do think it was overall a fair trial. I know people were talking about how the jury should have been sequestered or changed venue. I mean, you could have held this trial in Alaska, and you weren't going to have jurors who hadn't heard about the case and hadn't seen the footage. When you have a high publicity case like this, there's not much you can do about that publicity, right? And as far as sequestration goes,
that's the word.
Yeah, that's it. The judge, that might be some grounds where they could appeal, but at the same time, I mean, you'd have to have people away from their families for an entire month. I don't think that would have been doable. I've been reading accounts of other defense attorneys who have weighed in on this, and that's not something that probably would have been feasible to do, especially if you want people who are willing to serve. So I do think that he got a fair trial. I do believe that the jury was influenced by the case of the prosecution. And based on what Brandon Mitchell are saying and Lisa Christensen herself, I mean, these are things that I saw when I was watching the trial as well. And this is where I thought that they were going to go. Based on what I saw presented. I thought the prosecution laid out a great case. I think the defense actually did a good job too with what they had. But I think at the end of the day, it was going to be very difficult to convince a jury that kneeling on somebody's neck for 9 minutes didn't have anything to do with his death.
Yeah, I think that's really where the crux of the debate comes down to in this country, is that, did the fact that Derek Chauvin was on his neck for that period of time.
Well,
could that have nothing to do with it?
I have to interrupt now, Mark,
Please.
Because he clearly was not on his neck for that amount of time. Now, there was some time when he was on his neck and some time when he wasn't on his neck, but that's one of these things where I find frustrating when I see the popularization of non-facts or things that didn't actually happen. So he was on his neck at some points, but it was clearly demonstrated through the use of various camera angles that at other times during that long stretch, he was not on his neck. Now, that's not dispositive of whether or not he committed second-degree murder or any of the other crimes he was convicted of, but I think it's an important point to mention.
Okay, good. Well, let's talk about going forward. So if there is a retrial, how do we see the country reacting to this? Not so much the population, but do we think that politicians will be a little more circumspect in their statements if we have another trial, perhaps in order to avoid a third trial? What do you think, Jeff? Let's start with you on this.
Yeah, well, here's where I predict that Scott and I are going to agree, because I don't believe that they're going to be more circumspect at all. I think they're going to ramp it up. I think they're going to be worse. If there is a second trial, they will use it to say that America is a racist nation because they didn't take the first verdict. They're going to spin this in whatever way they can. And like I've said this before, I've written about it. There are some on the hard left, I believe, that wanted him to get off. And now I know I have a cynical streak, so that's the way I am. But it's not just people on the right who wanted him to get off. I think people on the hard left wanted him to get off so that they could use it to promote their agenda. They wanted riots. They wanted the unrest. And the verdict made it harder for them to get that. So if there is a second trial, it's just going to be ramped up even more, and it's going to put more strain on the public who wants to move on from this case, I believe.
Yeah, it's the helter-skelter Charlie Manson one, isn't it? They want to watch the world burn. Scott, what are your thoughts on this?
They will act in their own perceived best self-interest, and that's going to be to burn the country down, I think. Now, we do have a story out that says that Biden has instructed his Justice Department and the FBI to arrest Mr. Chauvin at the courthouse if he were to be acquitted of the charges. And so that presumably he would just reissue those orders. And so if Mr. Chauvin was set free, he would be arrested under the federal criminal law. And so maybe that would kind of tamp things down. But I expect all of them to bring gas cans, basically, and pour fuel on the fire because they think that it benefits them.
Scott, yeah, that actually answers my next question, that would federal charges be involved? Would the federal government step in to make some kind of statement through enforcing laws? Jeff, I'll give you the last word on this. Now, obviously, during the initial trial, we saw a lot of rallies, a lot of protests, some peaceful, some absolutely not peaceful. Do we expect pretty much the same thing or worse if this goes to another trial?
Yes, I think so. I mean, and just like I was saying before, if there is a second trial, then that will be used to pour fuel on the fire and get people out there protesting. Now, I won't mind the peaceful protests. They can do that. But there's going to be violence because that's what the hard left wants. So, yeah, this second trial would give them just the excuse. It'd be almost as good as for them as him getting acquitted in the first trial.
You know, Mark, you can give Jeff another last word, but I just want to say this one thing, that I would encourage people when they think about this to think about it in a reverse race situation. So if they think about a white man who was killed by a black man who was hated by society, who had a high chance maybe of beating the charges, who then they put in a special team just to get this one black guy convicted. And then the white guy was found to go to a rally with some offensive t-shirt. They had him saying, well, it wasn't that big a deal, and what their reaction would be where the race is reversed. So just leave you with that.
Well, I will take the last word because that's my prerogative as the host. I want to thank you both for joining in. Some great thoughts, some great information there. Much appreciated.
I'll actually add one more thing, that Jeff Charles, which you didn't say in the introduction, is also the host of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. And I encourage people to check that out. I enjoyed it, Jeff.
You can check it out on his YouTube channel or even tune in on Monday nights where we live stream it on libertynation.com.
Monday and Wednesday nights.
Monday and Wednesday nights. We are growing and growing. Right, many thanks to you both. And that's it for this edition of Liberty Nation TV. Remember to hit Liberty Nation News for original articles, the Uprising podcast hosted by Scott, the Rabbit Hole podcast, and our signature television program, The Conservative 5. Just go to libertynation.com on your browser or hit Rumble, YouTube, or check out Liberty Nation Roku News channel. I'm Mark Entelides. Thanks for watching. This program is a production of libertynation.com. Conservative news where truth matters.
Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.